So in terms of materials, you need 1/4 of a meter or a yard of fabric, and it should be something with a little bit of stretch, not a woven material. I was either looking for a sherpa or a fleece, and I ended up finding a fleece that I liked on sale. Also get matching thread if you don't have already. The second thing you need is permanent adhesive dots, and this will go on the bottom of your slippers and it will prevent falling. I found these Gorilla brand ones at Michael's, but I also looked online and there are cheaper ones at the dollar store. I just couldn't find any in the dollar stores in my city. So first, place your foot on a piece of paper and draw the outline. So you're going to do 4 big toes together, go around. Heel could be hard, you might need to lean forward a bit. And then do this toe crease and go around the big toe. And then all the way back. And it should look like something like this. Don't worry about it having all these ridges because you're gonna go in and smooth it out with a curve. So now I have this curve and I'm just gonna go in and smooth everything out. And you kind of want to avoid these little ridges and just make it one continuous smooth curve here. So for this ridge, then these little ridges here. Then again, just round it out, round out the ridge. I'm going to use this. Now we're going to create some notches. The first one is going to be at the bottom of the pattern, so right at the heel, and you're going to make a notch just in the middle. Now the second notch is going to be on the 4-toe side, and from this point you're going to measure out along the toes 4 inches, make a mark, and then create a notch. For that I use just like a flimsy measuring tape. I know some people have those like rubber rulers, those are great too. So I'll start the ruler. There's 2 ways you can do this with the measuring tape. Just kind of form it around the shape like this, which is easier. And then you can also do like a little pivot. So here, pivot around here. So that's 1 inch here. That's 4 inches right here. For the big toe side, you're gonna do 4.5. The next thing you're gonna do is add ease and seam allowance. So for your ease, it's gonna be 1/8 of an inch. Your seam allowance is going to be 1/4 of an inch. So in total, you're gonna add 3/8 of an inch all the way around. So I'm using this ruler and I'm going to count 3 little squares that equals 3/8 of an inch and just go all the way around the sole. Now the toe, it's going to be a little bit tricky because these are really close together and they are curved, so don't worry about it kind of looking like two lumps, you put this point and line here so that you can cut through to this point when you're sewing. And you can, at this point, you can kind of make them intersect. So you can see where the clear point is. So since it's here, I'm gonna draw a line. Now you can transfer the notches out into the seam allowance. And the last thing to do is label. So I'm gonna call this pattern Tabi Slippers. This is the sole, and it's going to be cut to self pieces and cut to lining. One last important thing is to take these measurements, so from this notch to this notch, and from this notch to this notch. And you're gonna take it along the seam line, so the inner of your two lines, not the outside line. For my foot, this measurement is 7 3/4. 7 1/2. So in total, you need this measurement of the front toe, which we set as 4 inches. The measurement of the single big toe, 4 1/2, where the notches are, and then from notch to heel notch on the inner side of the foot, and notch to heel notch on the outer side of the foot. So now we're gonna create the outer 4-toe pattern piece. So the pattern piece that is gonna sew to this part. The first thing to do is create an X and Y axis, but the X is going to be closer to the left-hand side. So I'm just placing my ruler so that it is flush with the edge of the piece of paper. And all the way down. And then turn your piece of paper up. You're going to create an X-axis that is also closer to this side. So it should look like this. We also need a couple measurements for this part. The first measurement is the heel upwards towards the ankle measurement, and then also the toe crease upwards towards the ankle. So I'll write those two down. It's just going to be this measurement. How far up do you want this slipper to go? So for me, I would like 2 1/2 inches. And then the second measurement is from your toe crease up. So I think I'm gonna go between 1 1/2 and 2. So heel to ankle, 2 1/2, and then toe crease. I'm gonna do 1 1/2. Up to 3 before when I was sampling this pattern, and it's very hard to slip your foot in. So I feel like the best measurement is between 1 1/2 and 2. We're gonna take the sole of our shoe. We're gonna match it up with this point. This is where your notch is gonna be. So you're gonna put it underneath your piece of paper. So here is the intersection point. You want to follow this internal line. I'm just going to do a rough sketch up until it plateaus. So it starts to plateau over here. So now you can go ahead and shape that out. And I'm also going to shape this out so that line is smooth. Okay, after that, you want to take your ruler and extend this line out. So just extend it out, just past to the end of the page. Now you want to measure out along this line from this notch point. You want to measure along this point, whatever this measurement was here. So mine is 7 3/4. So start here. So for me, 7 3/4 is right here. Once you get to that point, you are going to square it off and measure up. So again, just use the lines on your ruler. Measure up, and on that line, you're gonna measure up 2.5 inches. This is going to be where your heel is. So that's where that is there. Next thing you're gonna do is at the 2.5 inches, you're gonna do another square and go towards the front of the toe. So this point here is this point. So this distance here is here to here. Now this distance is going to be a lot different and a lot bigger than this distance from here to here. Next thing we're gonna do is at this point, we are going to create a 45-degree angle. So on my ruler, it's basically one edge of a square to another, so it doesn't matter how big or small the square is. So I'm gonna create a 45-degree angle from this point out here. So this goes out, and on that line that you drew out, you're gonna measure 3/4 of an inch. This measurement is the crease of your foot, so from the top to the bottom where it kind of like hits the floor. Now what's left is to actually create the fabric that will cover the toes. So it will look kind of like that, some sort of ovally shape. So again, you're gonna get your measurements. My measurement is 4 inches, which is what basically everyone is using. And because the toes are rounded and there is a curve, in order to get it over the toes, you need to create ease and room so that the fabric will be able to gather. So your ease should be between 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches, just depending on how big your foot is. So if you can get anywhere between there, that would be perfect. So my measurement is 4 inches. I'm gonna add 3/4 of an inch or 1.5 inches. So it should be between 4 3/4 to 5.5. What you could do, and what is the easiest, is take your measuring tape, put one side here and the other side, I wanna do 5.5. So that's what it kind of should look like. Now the longer toes are gonna be on this side. This is where your pinky toe is, so you kind of want the biggest curve point to be around there. So at that point, you can kind of just make like a rough estimate of what you want it to look like. That is very rough. Then you can kind of take that, measure it quickly, see how accurate you are. Okay, so that's about 5.5. So that looks pretty good. Now after that, you can take your curve and curve that out. This is 5.5 measures to, and I'm going to put squiggly lines. Squiggly lines in pattern making means gathering. So the next thing to do is on this line, you're gonna measure out 1.5 inches and then square up. You can do between 3/8 of an inch or 1/2 of an inch. I'm gonna go up 3/8. Now you have this point and this point. You're gonna take your curve, just a very slight curve, and then along this line, so that curve that you just created, at this point, you're going to square down 1/2 inch. So now these two are going to become a square. going to square down, and you're on that intersection point, you're going to mark down 1/2 inch. So it's going to be right here. And now you want this to connect to the end, but you do want to round it out quite nicely. And don't worry about going below this line. So you want to kind of free hand it at first, something like this. And follow that 1/2 inch line and curve this out. You want to get to this point here. You also want to maintain that square. So you want to get to the line before you get to the end. So this remains a square as well. The last thing to do is add ease and seam allowance. So ease again is going to be 1/8 of an inch. And then seam allowance is going to be 1/4. So in total that equals 3/8 all the way around. Okay, the last and final pattern piece is the big toe / inner foot pattern piece. So we're going to start off the same way, except we're going to flip it. So the axis is going to be oriented towards the right side. So we're going to repeat the same step of following a curve. This curve is very slight. It isn't as drastic as this one, but we're still going to copy it up until around this point and then stop. I'm gonna use my windowsill again. Just make sure everything is parallel on the sheets. I'm gonna put that right there. Okay, that looks good. And I'm gonna start from this side, make little marks, and then I will connect it with my curve ruler. Okay, so this is my dotted line. I'm just going to smooth it out. We're gonna basically repeat the same steps that we did on the other side, except there are a few changes. So from this line, you are going to make sure it's parallel to your axes. You're gonna extend this line out here. So along this line, you're going to take this measurement, which is, in my case, 7.5. And then from that point, you're going to square up and measure 2.5. And then again, square across. From this point here, you are going to measure down 3/4 of an inch. The reason why we don't leave this full length at 2.5 is because from here to here is much smaller than from here to here. So you don't want a lot of extra fabric hanging out over here. Could even bunch up right at the middle of your toes. So you're gonna go down 3/4 of an inch. From this point here, you are going to measure a line that is 45 degrees from this line. That is going to be the seam for your crease. That's my line there. And I'm going to measure out 3/4 of an inch. So now what we have left to do again is the toe. So we want around 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches of ease. So if I want 1.5 inches, my measurement here is 4.5. So I'm gonna try and get to 6 to 6.5. I'm just gonna take this because it's easier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and because it's not multiple toes and it's just one toe that's most likely like symmetrical, you don't have to like orient your curve in a certain direction like we did the other one. Draw that curve. And this, I'm gonna draw the gathers and also state that it's 6 inches. So the first thing we need to do is create a line here. So you want to square it to this line and just go across. And on that line, you want to measure out 1.5 inches. So this is square. And then again, you're going to go up 3/8 of an inch. And then you're going to draw a slight curve from here to here. And then again, you want to extend that line. And then on this line here, at this intersection point, you want to square it off. So I'm gonna align one of my lines here, right at that point here, the intersection point. This needs to be square, and I'm going to go down. Now down on that, you want to measure 1/2 inch. Once you get to that point, you can start curving to meet here. Again, we're going to add 1/8 of an inch of ease and 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so in total 3/8 of an inch all the way around. Now that I have all the pattern pieces done, I'm going to trace them onto tracing paper. This is optional, but it's something that I like to do so I don't get rid of all of my draft notes. So for anyone who doesn't know, when you trace out your pattern pieces, you want to include the outer sewing line, your notches, as well as your labeling. And for this pattern piece, you also want to include this line down here to where that little dot is, so you know how much to cut into. So now I have all my pattern pieces cut, and they're all cut to self and cut to lining, but I'm going to use the same fabric self as I do lining, and that is going to be this navy fleece material. You can see it has stretch a little bit, and I'm going to cut everything on fold, and I'm going to do that twice so I can get 4 pieces of everything in total. Take the second one here, and my third one here, that will fit. So you just want to cut on the line all the way around, and then also your notches. So just as a reminder, there's 1 notch over here on your outer foot pattern piece, there's 1 notch over here on your inner foot pattern piece, and then there are 1, 2, 3 notches on your sole. And be mindful that your seam allowance is only 1/4 of an inch, so you only want to notch into your pattern piece around 1/8 of an inch, or else it will go through the seam. Okay, so now I've cut enough for 1 foot. I'm gonna have to do that all over again for the second foot, but I'm just gonna show you where I want to notch. So right here on the sole, it's going to be at the bottom, at the heel, and then on either side. Also on the sole, you want to cut down this line. As you can see, I didn't cut all the way. I cut about 3/4 of the way through. And if I need to snip more, I will when I sew. But it's always better to do less than more because you can't reverse that cut if you do it now. And then for the outer foot, I'm just going to create this notch here. And then I'm going to cut another set for the other foot. And then you're ready to sew. Okay, so these are the cut fabric and pattern pieces for one foot. Now, this is our outer foot pattern piece and this is our inner foot pattern piece. We're going to deal with those first. So my right side is the side with the fleece, and as you can see, these pieces are mirrored. So the first thing you're going to do is take one of your outer piece and one of your inner piece. So it's going to be the ones that are mirroring each other. So it's going to be like this pair and then this pair, right sides together. You're going to match up this part and it's going to look like this essentially. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this together because the first sew line that we're doing is here, down, and then up to here. And then also you want to make sure that these two are mirroring each other. So our seam allowance is 1/4 inch. You're going to start here, pivot at this point, and then go all the way up on both sides. I'm also using universal needles, which are both for woven fabrics and stretch. Pivot, so lift up your presser foot and pivot. So the next step after you do this seam here, you are going to go back to the heel edge. You're going to line these up and you are going to pin them. This is going to be the next seam. It's going to be 1/4 inch across this way. So after I'm done this one, which is the self, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the lining. So I'll do this seam here and then this back seam here. So this is what you should have at this point. This seam sewed and the heel seam sewed on both. Now we're going to attach the sole to the upper part of the slipper, and we're going to do that by lining up this back seam with the back notch, and we're going to go all the way until you hit the notch that you made on either side here. So again, these are mirrored and I want to sew them right sides together. So I will match this one up. This is my big toe, the longer one of the two, and because I want it to be right sides together, I know that this one matches with this one here. So I'll do that one first. So I'm gonna start with the heel. So here's my heel notch. I'm going to pin it. Another thing that you need to know when you are sewing the sole to the upper is that you need to leave an escape hatch. Escape hatch is basically a couple inches that is unsewn, and that is so you can flip the shoe inside out and close off the seams. When you have multiple holes and you want something to be completely lined without any edges showing, you need to create an escape hatch. So just to make it a lot easier, we're going to create an escape hatch on the self and the lining. So I'm going to leave about 2 inches on this side. First, I will match up my notches. So these notches here. And then I will pin from here to here, and I will leave here to here open. for my escape hatch. I will leave that much open, and then I know that this is where I start and this is where I stop on this side. On this side, you don't need an escape hatch, so you can just pin all the way. So I'm gonna find my notch on the sole here, my notch on the slipper upper here, match those up. And now that I have this one all done and pinned, I'm going to do the same thing with this one here. Now that I have both of these pinned, I'm gonna go around and sew from notch to notch, so all the way around, leaving the escape hatch on either side. So here and here. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to start from this side at the notch. So this is my escape hatch, so I'm going to skip over this and I'm going to go to here and start. Now that we have these sewed, we're going to go in and do a base stitch around the toes. You're going to do a base stitch from here all the way around to here where this seam is, and then so start and stop, and then on the other side again start and stop. You can do it at a 1/4 inch, or if you can, try and do it at an 1/8 inch so you don't see the stitch marks when you go and sew them together. So for a base stitch, you're going to increase your length to the highest on your machine. And with base stitches, you don't do a back stitch. So you want to leave your thread ends really long so you'll have something to pull on. Start right here. So you want to go right to the edge of the seam, but not on top of it. So I will lift it up now. And again, you want to leave your thread ends really long also on this side. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. So I'm going to stop at the notch, so it's right there. And again, no back stitch, and then your thread ends really long. I'm going to go ahead and do the other one. We're going to go ahead and gather the toes, and we're going to do that around our own toes. So I'll show you. This is a real stretch for me. So I'm going to put this around my foot. Very cozy. So I'm going to find my gathering stitches. I'm going to pull at one of them, and that will start to gather it. Now, again, you want to gather it around your foot. So that is a good fit for me on this side. I'm just going to distribute the gathers along here a little bit. Okay, so you see how that is nice and tight on my foot. Now I'm going to do the other side. Again, distributing, gather. Okay, so these are my two gathers. Okay, so now that this has formed to your foot, you're gonna go in, so you're gonna take it off gently, and you're gonna go in and pin this to the bottom. So as you can see, it shrunk quite significantly, and there is excess on here, but that's okay because you can just shave that off at the end. So I'm gonna go ahead, pin this. You can flatten it a bit. so now that that is pinned, it might look a little crazy like this, but don't worry. You're gonna do the same thing on the other foot, and it'll be the other foot because they're mirrored. Also, with this center seam part here, you want to make sure that it's flat when you are pinning it, because sometimes it does bunch up like this, and then when you go to sew it, it actually doesn't sew down to anything, and it kind of just sews up and across, and then there's a hole. So just make sure that when you are pinning it, it is flat on the sole. Now that everything is pinned, you're gonna go and start sewing from notch all the way around to where this seam is, the toe crease, right here. You'll be able to see it better on your own, but everything's gathered, so it's a little bit hidden. So basically, go from here around to the toe seam, pivot here, then go around the four-toe, sew all the way to the side notch as well, and you're going to do that for both. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew. I'm going to start at this side, at this notch. So I'm going down towards this center seam. When I get there, I'm going to lift up my foot, pivot, and then start on the other side. This is the back. As you can see, there is a lot of fabric here, so you're gonna have to go in and snip this. Now I'm gonna go in and snip close to this V point right here. Again, you're only snipping the bottom sole layer. Okay, so it's like that. And you can also go around and snip this excess or clip into it. I'm just going to grate it. Okay, so it looks like that now. And now I'm just going to turn them inside out. Okay, so this is what it looks like when it's turned right sides out. You have the sole, the escape hatch. And now I'm going to do the same thing all over again with the lining. So I'm going to sew around, cut through the back, and I'm going to turn it right sides out. Okay, so now I have both of them sewn. The last thing to do is sew this closed. So I'm going to flip one of these inside out. So this one's flipped inside out. Now, because I want it to be right sides together, I'm gonna put this inside of this one so that this and this are matched up. So after you have that in, you can pin all around the opening. And the next step is to sew this closed with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This part here is the most trickiest to sew, so you might have to do it in 2 rounds and go around here, stop, and then do this itself. Now I'm gonna go in and do this part. After you're done that, you can go ahead and trim the seam allowance a little bit, and that will just help with bulk when you turn this right sides out. After you've trimmed the seam allowance, you're going to go in through the escape hatch in the back heel and flip everything right sides out. So it's gonna look something like this, and you basically just, starting from that seam that you just sewed, you want to begin to kind of collapse it into one another. So first I'm creating this fold and this fold here, and then I'm pushing the toes in, like that, shaping this out, and then I'm gonna go ahead, before I even bring the toes in, I'm gonna actually, from the outside, flip them inside out like this. My finger to the other side as well. Okay, and then it should start to take form. Now the last couple sewing steps are just sewing the escape hatches closed. So the first thing to do is go in from the inside. You're going to find the escape hatch, and you are going to stick your fingers through till you get to the outside of the foot, and then you're going to find this escape hatch here on the outside. So the first escape hatch that we're sewing is the one on the outside, so you want to find it here and then pull it through the one on the inside. So I'm going to pull it through, and then once I have it through, I'm going to pin it closed. Okay, now I'm going to go in and sew this with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so after you sewed that, you can turn everything right sides out again, and it'll look like this. And then you're going to go ahead and sew the last escape hatch in the lining or the inner part of the slipper. So what I like to do is fold the 2 fabric pieces in where the opening is, like this, and then pin across. And then for sewing, you're going to want to do an edge stitch just to close that off. The last and final step is to add adhesive dots to the sole. So I'm just going to peel off the plastic and stick them on. Okay, so this is one slipper done. I'm gonna go ahead and do everything all over again for the other slipper. Okay, now this is both of them done.